formally start today's conversation, let us welcome the director of the English as an International Language program for her opening message. Let us welcome Assistant Professor Dr. Poonpon Sukawati.
Thank you, Joy, for introducing me. So welcome everyone to the EIL webinar series organized by the English as an International Language program, Chulalongkorn University. To begin with, I'd like to extend my appreciation to the honorable speakers and all audience who are giving your valuable time to join this academic dialogue. Well, unlike other talks, the following conversation would contribute to public in a casual manner, with the underlined belief that we are all friends and colleagues in academia. And the invited experts today are ready to share what they know to friends. From now on, we are going to learn about the situation of English language assessment together. For a global view, we have Dr. Peter Gu from the University of Wellington. And for a local view, we have Dr. Kornwipa Poonpon from Khon University and Ajahn Napat Jitpaisarnwattana from Silpakorn University. Well, let's enjoy that conversation entitled Global Transformations in English Language Assessment. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Poonpon, for that wonderful opening message. Once again, welcome all to the first installment of the English as an International Language webinar series 2, titled Global Transformations in English Language Assessment. We all know that the pandemic have really caused dramatic change in the way we do assessing. And today we have invited several speakers who would shed light on issues from local and global context. Before we proceed, allow me to introduce them formally. Our first speaker is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Khon University, where she heads the MA English program and directs the Center for English Language Excellence. Her research interests include corpus linguistics, second language assessment, EAP and ESP pedagogy. Let us all welcome Assistant Professor Dr. Kornwipa Poonpon. Hello, Ajahn.
Good morning, everyone. สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you very much for being with us today. Our next speaker is a lecturer at the Department of Western Languages, Faculty of Archaeology, Silpakorn University, where he is currently completing his PhD in Applied Linguistics at King Mongkut University of Technology, Thornbury, where he was awarded the Pet Prajom Clow PhD grant. He specializes in language technology and its application in English language teaching. Let us welcome Ajahn Napat Jitpaisarnwattana. Hello, or we should call him Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
Hello.
And of course, to complete our pool of speakers, our third speaker has an intensive teaching and teacher education experience in New Zealand, Hong Kong, and mainland China. He is Associate Professor at the Victoria University of Wellington and heads the School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies. He specializes in language testing and assessment, learner autonomy, and learning strategies, and vocabulary acquisition. Let us welcome Associate Professor Dr. Peter Yong-Hee Gu. Hello, Professor.
Hello, guys. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks, everyone, for sparing your precious time to be with us. And for today, we're going to cover two major themes, particularly language assessment and education, language assessment before, during, and after COVID. So to get us all started, I would like to ask our speakers to share your experiences in language testing and assessment, and perhaps share us your current research projects concerning our topic. Would you like to start? Assistant Professor Dr. Kornwipa.
Joey, but start with unpin me first. I can go
sure.
off. I can go off stage now.
Thank you for reminding me that.
Thank you.
That's a good start.
Indeed. You may continue, Jan Kornwipa.
Oh, all right. Okay. Start with the lady first. Okay. Right now, since I'm the chair or the director of Center for English Language Excellence, actually at my university, we are responsible for developing a test, proficiency test, to be given for graduate students who would like to continue their study in our university. So it's more like localized, local test, let's say, because the students are required to give either like CUTEP, TUGET, IELTS, TOEFL, right? And we also have our own option, which is KKUL, we call Khon University Academic English Language Test. So that's the main test that we are responsible for. And since the COVID come, we actually kind of transfer that into the online test. By the word online, that means the students or test takers can be at their home and then they can take a test. You know, like everything is more like localized, local driven test. We can talk more about this later, but since the beginning, I would like to introduce this to you first, and then we can go into detail. And the research that we are doing to support that is to finding the best solution for administering these online tests. And also, since we have a little bit of problem with the score report, you know, because we have 5 bands and a lot of students do not pass the threshold, you know. So our major stakeholder seems to be worried about that because they cannot accept the students, you know. So that's why they would like to talk to us about how can we, you know, a little bit flexible or adjust the scores range or whatever. So I'm now doing a research study on expanding scores, you know, kind of refine the score range to kind of help a little bit the student who are not who are at the threshold level, you know, to pass the level. Yeah. So that's more about the research that I'm doing right now, and it's very challenging. Yes.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Kornwipa. We can continue with Ajahn Patrick.
Right. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So for me, I guess I bring a rather different experience because probably the most inexperienced of the 3 in terms of research. But I guess what I've been doing is I've been working a lot with students because I have been preparing students to take all the standardized tests like IELTS, like SAT, like TOEFL and stuff like that. I also sit in the middle because I'm the examiner as well. I was IELTS examiner before. Now I'm doing the test for Cambridge assessment. Okay, so I prepare them, I assess them, I send them into college, and then I also teach them in college as well. So I haven't done much research, okay, in terms of language assessment, but hopefully what I can bring to the table is the real world experience of preparing and having worked with the student in language testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very good start to give us a picture of what the local context is in terms of language testing and assessment. Now we're moving on to the global context, and I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Gu.
Hi, good day, everybody. So I guess my own research has focused mainly on the formative side of assessment the last few years. Although I do teach 2 courses here at the master's level, the one that we call language testing that focus mainly on the traditional kind of standardized norm reference kind of testing. The other course is what we've been calling language assessment, which focuses mainly on the teaching and learning side of using assessment for formative purposes. I'm helping a lot of my colleagues here. We have in my school, we have a large EAP program preparing international students for university entry just before they enter university in New Zealand. In my university, for example, their IELTS score might be, say, half a band lower than the required university entry English language score. So they go through our EAP program. So for this particular program, of course, we have all sorts of testing needs like screening, placement, formative purposes, interim quizzes. Towards the end, students will have a exit test before they are allowed to go into university programs. So that's, I've been helping my colleagues in that program in developing their different test suites for different purposes and analyzing the tests and standardizing and validating the versions they've developed, especially the last year. With simply because of COVID, so we have been faced with, we were talking about this a bit later in detail, we've been faced with similar problems that you've been facing. So teachers have been asked to develop a lot of new tests and new versions of the same tests for different purposes. So we, I was helping my colleagues in doing all sorts of analysis of their existing, the new tests. And I do have a number of PhD students now who are completing testing assessment related projects. Currently, 3 of them are doing assessment related projects. One is doing a project on integrated reading and writing tests for university purposes. Another is looking at the teachers' assessment practices at the tertiary level in Vietnam. And the third is looking at how teacher assessment literacy can be developed through some sort of a formative assessment program. So these are the current 3 PhD students I have working on assessment related topics. An immediate graduate who has also done research on testing, who graduated last year, was somebody who validated the listening test of V-STEP. If you know the V-STEP in Vietnam, it's supposed to be a localized test replacing IELTS and TOEFL for Vietnamese users of English. So she basically validated the listening part of that test. So these are mainly the kind of work that I'm involved in. I'm also helping quite a few projects in China. One of the major projects that I've been helping with is a online diagnostic kind of test suite developed for secondary school English language teachers. So that's been a project that has been going on for quite a few years now. Thousands and thousands of students have gone through that test, the diagnostic test pegged to the secondary school curriculum. So that's basically what I've been working on.
Thank you very much. Those pretty much give us a very clear premise on where our discussion will be going in the next part. So we'll now continue with our conversation proper, focusing on language assessment in education. And to get this session started, let's start with why do we have to test and who actually should do the testing? Would you like to start this time, Patrick?
Right. Okay. I didn't expect that. Yeah, I didn't expect to be the first one. So right. Yeah, I guess from my experience, so your question is why do we need to test their language proficiency levels, right? Well, I guess from my experience, I believe that it is we need some sort of the same measure, okay, to see whether the candidates will be able to use the language effectively in the context that they will be in. Okay, so that's why they have different sort of levels, okay, or requirement that they have. Like, I think for most undergraduate programs in many countries, I maybe compare it to IELTS, they require 6.0. And in some other countries, for the postgraduate degrees, they require 6.5 or 7.0. So I guess it is from the administrative perspective, it is quite, I think they need some sort of standard so that they can see whether the people that they will work with will be able to perform what they are expected to perform well in that particular context. And I guess that's a starting point of why we need to test the language ability.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it from Ajahn Kornwipa.
To me, I kind of see the reasons of why to test into two major levels. You know, like the first one is at the standard level. By the word standard level, I mean, like Ajahn Napat have mentioned, like the global test or the institute that gives the test, you know, because there's a need for international students who would like to go to study in the international universities or in the US, New Zealand, Australia, right? So in that case, the reason of testing is to assess the student proficiency in order to make sure that they can study in the university in the English-speaking countries, right? And the next level, kind of sub-level apart from the global standard, is some kind of local standard. By the way, local standard, that would be like CU TAPE, TU GET, KQL, and other universities test, you know, who would like to give another option for the students to pay, actually to pay less, I can say, right? Because sometimes they cannot afford taking TOEFL or IELTS, so do we have other options for them, sincerely speaking, right? So that is the standard at the local level, like domestic in our country. So in that case, again, we would like to test in order to make sure that they can at least have ability of English to read papers, you know, or write some papers in English, because that's the requirement for graduate students, right? And another part, the second level, is at the classroom level, because I'm also a teacher, right? And at the same time, I'm also a test developer. So I see myself at two levels, like the standard local and the classroom-based assessment. So I think as a teacher, I would like to see whether they achieve what I have taught or not. You know, whether they have some kind of weak points or strengths or not. So I see it in two different levels like this, like standard one and the classroom-based assessment. So that's pretty much from my side.
Thank you very much. Let's hear it from Professor Guru.
This is a pretty complex question and pretty, we can look at it from different perspectives and angles, I guess, when you're talking about test purposes for different assessment systems. First of all, when we're talking about seeing assessment as not necessarily measurement, not necessarily as the traditional tests, if we see assessment as, you know, just eliciting some sort of performance or knowledge from people or, you know, different stakeholders to show that they're able to, they know something, they're able to do something, they're learning something well, So we actually can see, if we look at tests or assessment from that level, we'll see that assessment is an absolutely needed procedure for human cognition and human behavior. Everything we're doing every day is being assessed in that. For example, as we speak, as I speak now, I was constantly looking at my my computer and see whether I'm speaking too loud or too whether it. By the way, am I speaking too loud?
No,
Anyway.
it's just good. It's very
Okay. I'm looking at I'm putting my a speaker by at 30% so that I don't really speak too loud, don't really sound too loud. What am I doing? I'm assessing myself. So when we walk, we're constantly assessing ourselves as to whether we're walking, towards the right direction. So everything we do is assessed. So assessment is part of being a human being. That's part of us. We're adjusting, after we assess ourselves, our behavior, and so on. So that's from a basic human cognition level. When we're talking about educational assessment, different, if you look at the kind of educational system in Thailand, for example, assessment has to be there for all sorts of purposes, for government, for districts, for universities and schools and educational institutions, even private institutions. We'll need to answer to our stakeholders to tell them that the educational system is going well, or if a particular district is not doing well enough, we need to do something about it. So that is what we call accountability for decision-making purposes. So all sorts of institutions need that for educational assessment. And what they prefer would be the kind of quick scores. If you don't tell me you are able to do this and that, I don't care. What I care is tell me how is your district ranked among the whole educational system. It's at the bottom. Tell me what you can do to improve it. So that's what government and Ministry of Education and officials will need. At the same time, governments also need to improve the educational experience of students and the school effectiveness. In addition to kind of telling them, okay, you're not performing well compared to other districts. If you look at educational assessment reforms around the whole world, people are trying to play with assessment to improve education. And one particular lever for any educational change is to improve education through assessment by building into the large tests whatever you want to be tested and learned and taught into those tests, or by building into the system some sort of a formative assessment system that tells teachers and learners, okay, every step of the way, you're observing your performance, and then you are trying to adjust the teaching and learning so that the education effectiveness of the system is improved. So that's at that level, of course. Teachers and learners, of course, we all need assessment, but mainly for our own teaching and learning formative purposes, screening purposes, placement purposes, diagnostic purposes, exit purposes, certification purposes. So we, schools and teachers and students need mainly some sort of assessment system that's close to the teaching and learning, And of course, another kind of group of stakeholders I can think of as parents who would care more about how well is my kid doing at school. So rather than, you know, how well is this kid doing in mathematics in terms of what mathematics formulas this particular kid knows or not. So it's mainly, parents mainly want to know, for example, how well their kids are ranked in a class, in a school, and so on. So these are different purposes at different levels from different stakeholders for different needs. Joy?
Thank you very much. I think our speakers have mentioned the key word to our next point, particularly the localization, the global needs. So let's talk about the local and global needs and the localization of language assessment. For this part, let's begin with Ajahn Kornwipa.
I think this part is very difficult to answer to me because for the global needs, well, all like at the global level, to me, I think standardized test like proficiency test is a kind of needed in order for the students to have a chance to study abroad or like in other countries, not only in the America or in English-speaking countries only, but in Thailand. Even in Thailand, there are a lot of international students right now too at many universities. So to me, it's at the global needs calls for the needs for standardized test particularly. And in that sense, it also connected to how the students prepare themselves for these kind of global needs in terms of continuing the study. That's from the education perspective. And also from the professional perspective, global needs also call for this kind of thing. Like Peter have mentioned CFR, right? CFR is a kind of global needs right now, even especially in the Southeast Asia, like in Vietnam, in Taiwan, right? And in Thailand as well. So to me, I consider that as a global needs because we would like to be accepted. We would like to be at the equal level. We have to have kind of the same framework to rank our proficiency, so that it could be globally acknowledged, right? So that's the global needs for me, right? And one of the most challenging is from the global needs as local people, local researchers, how can we do something in terms of assessment to meet that global needs? Because sometimes it's quite like, oh, that's too far for us, especially in Thailand. When CFR first adopted in Thailand in 2014, I remember I and Ajahn Jirada were in the band, to like travel around the country to give them knowledge about CFR and how to apply CFR into their curriculum, right? So that's the first attempt of the government to give knowledge to the teachers and practical guidelines for adapting CFR into that classroom. And it's very difficult because the teachers do not really understand. They still think that CFR is a test. So it's kind of that we should think about that. Even now, many of them have thought that CFR is still a test, And I just read a paper last night about CFR in Thailand, the recent papers. Teachers are still have some problems with applying CFR into their classroom because they don't know like how to actually. There's no practical guidelines for them, especially at the assessment part. They don't know like what rubrics they would like to choose, you know, in order to assess their students speaking, writing, right? Especially at the primary levels, they have problems with applying CFI in their classroom. So it's still a challenge for Thai teachers and Thai researchers to link global needs and local practice in that sense. We need time to do that. We need actually to have some kind of collaboration of the researchers and do something for that. Yeah. And for localization of language assessment, that's another thing that we should consider. How can we localize Thai context, you know, into the language assessment? Maybe Ajahn Peter can give more insights about localization, because you have worked with Vietnamese. You can share experience of working with Vietnamese context, right? So I'm still have some kind of thought about, you know, localized things, because one of my PhD students is doing his assessment project on writing scale. We are thinking, since global English is very, you know, popular now, so we are thinking, is it possible that academic writing could be localized? You know, people still like, oh, academic writing, well, you have to write like native speaker. You have to write in order to get published. If they accept your paper, that means your language should be standardized, not localized. You know, but at the classroom level, we have asked many teachers, and they said, well, we can be flexible in classroom level, you know, that kind of thing. So still, we are working on that. How can we localize writing test in Thai context at two different levels, like at the standard levels and classroom-based level? There might not be some solution yet, but we are still working on getting some information around that. Yeah, to me, it's only the word challenging.
Thank you very much. And truly, those are quite an issue in language assessment. And thank you very much for bringing that up, Ajahn Kornwipa. And I agree that Dr. Peter would give us so much insights later on, particularly as he has experience in different countries. So I'll park it a little bit and I'll move first to Ajahn Napat.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for letting me speak before Peter. Right. Right. Okay. Well, I agree with a lot of points that Ajahn Kornwipa has made. I guess let's start with the global needs first. Yeah, I guess now, because education is becoming more and more global, I mean, a lot of people are going to study abroad and things like that. So I think the need is necessary, you know, like we really need to make sure that, you know, students are ready to take the standardized tests that are required at the global level. It is also, I guess, another push was the idea of, you know, trying to build the new generation to become global citizen. You know, like they are trying to like, especially with the younger generation, like now, who are in primary school, high school, their parents, you know, just want their kids to be able to be competitive in the global world. Okay, so that's why they are trying to prepare their children to be at the global level, and you know, one way to do that is, you know, to make sure that their kids are at the global standards. Okay, in all aspects, not just in language, you know, in all other academic aspects as well. So that's the starting point. And to me, now I am feeling that the global needs are influencing the local needs, okay, in Thailand, okay, because I guess we are trying to, well, in a way, we are trying to be local, but we also want our low quality to be reflected at the global level. Right, so we want our local taste to be recognized, to, you know, and things like that. So that I can see the approach, especially when Ajahn Kornwipa mentioned about CEFR now, and it's everywhere, and it's embedded in all the curriculum, especially in textbooks. Okay, even in the textbook that are written for local students, they have CFR level at the back of the book. Okay, this is for Thai primary school, like, you know, grade 4 to grade 6, and CFR level A2 or something like that, right? So I mean, it is embedded everywhere. So I guess now we are at the stage where probably we are trying to bridge, okay, the gap between the global and the local, and we are not pulling down the global needs, but probably we are trying to lift up the standard for the local textbook, local materials, and local taste to actually meet with that standards. And I believe that's the direction that we are sort of moving in the future. Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting point. I think, yeah, the goal is really to have that level of the equal footing of global and local standards. So anyone can just, you know, let's say, take advantage of several opportunities. And indeed, the direction could be top down, and I'm taking that word in a very loose definition, focusing on the global and adapting it to the local context, and the bottom up, where we try to use the local to be linked with the global standards. And I think to give us quite an insightful discussion on his wide experiences in this area, let us invite Professor Gu.
Thanks. I think it's at least a matter of looking at why do we need the global versus local perspectives. Partly because of the globalization of English, and then of course we should also be looking at the tension between the localization and the globalization of language assessment as such. So first of all, in terms of, you know, you're talking about even, this is the first time actually I hear that that CFR is being pushed into Thai schools. It's what is it? It's basically language standards from a particular theoretical perspective, which is functional. So if you ask yourself the question, what is language ability? Of course, traditional linguistics or linguistics 101 would tell you that you know, it's structures, it's vocabulary, it's grammar, and it's the 4 skills and so on. But starting from CFR, suddenly, of course, before CFR, we have the functional perspectives, but starting from CFR, we suddenly have a operationalized version of language ability that is from a functional perspective. In terms of every aspect of life, what can you do with language? So that particular perspective caught up with people, experts in language and experts in testing. And it basically shows that how you can actually show people, everybody involved, what people can do with different aspects of language to perform various functional social tasks. So that is why that particular perspective becomes so important. Actually, if I don't know how many of you have heard of China's Standards of English, which was published a few years ago. I can't remember which year. Initially, after this, you know, for those of you who don't really know CEFR, it's Common European Framework of Reference. It was developed by European Union for communication, for using languages across Europe so that people can go to each other's country and work and study and so on. So that's why they needed a functional, description of different abilities in using language for various social purposes. So after that, a number of other countries started to follow up. Initially, a few countries were talking, experts in a few countries were talking in East Asia, for example, China, Japan, South Korea, and so on, were trying to establish some sort of a common Asian or East Asian framework of reference. And of course, people didn't agree with each other in terms of common needs in these areas. That's why China developed its own framework of reference, China's English standards of English. Why does China need a standards of English? For various uses of English for within China or across different countries, for Chinese graduates, Chinese nationals to go abroad to do trading, studying, and whatever. So that's why they needed a ruler, as it were, to measure the standards of English language use for everybody in China. So that was why it was established in China, China's standards of English. In Vietnam, they went through another approach. They simply took the common European framework of reference and then localized it in terms of taking a hard look at each standard in the common European framework of reference, and then say, is this relevant to Vietnam? Is this relevant to Vietnam? So if it's not, it's taken away. If it's relevant, it's kept there. So they developed a Vietnamese version of the CFR, so that it's not just the standards of language, language abilities, basically, but also in terms of assessment within Vietnam, so they can use the standards as a reference guide to develop their own tests and so on. So that's a globalization of a language rather than English language. Of course, that's another matter. A globalization of English language needs, we don't really need to focus any time on that to realize that we do have the globalization, for example, the ASEAN region. It's also a matter of globalizing the conceptualization of language ability, not just English. So Vietnam developed their own local version of the CFR and developed their own tests. So as I said, it's not just this globalization and localization, it's also the globalization and localization of language tests, in the sense that the big tests, the big international tests that we know of, for example, TOEFL, IELTS, TOEIC, they're just so expensive. So expensive that, for example, local, I don't know how expensive it is in Thailand, but definitely they're making billions of dollars, although they call themselves non-profit organizations. So the local students can't really pay for these tests, especially when we're talking about Southeast Asia, Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia and so on. So they have to develop some sort of a local test to replace the international test for their own purposes, so that the local students and test takers can afford the test. It's such a big problem that many local governments in Southeast Asia that I know have either developed their own tests or beginning to think of developing their own tests for different purposes. A few years ago, I had a PhD student who from Vietnam who looked at the washback impact of TOEIC as an exit test in Vietnamese universities. The situation was the Vietnamese government was trying to push for the improvement of English language proficiency among its university graduates. And one way they saw suitable for this aim was to use a test. So what kind of a test was it? They have to use, it was a use of a test for exit purposes. So everybody graduating from a Vietnamese university had to meet a certain standard in order to graduate of English, in order to graduate, no matter what they major in university. So what kind of English test should they use for this purpose? Immediately they were thinking we could develop our own test, but we don't really have the expertise. Then if we use an international test, which test should we use? And they looked at the tests. Of course, every test is so expensive. How can you ask every university student to take all those big international tests when they were so expensive? At that juncture, TOEIC was pretty market sensitive, pushed it itself into Vietnamese universities and said, okay, we can use our test. What is TOEIC? Testing of English for International Communication. That's the name of it, but it's a misnomer. It was developed by, of course, ETS, but for Japanese businessmen and later on included into the, the business training of South Korean business people and trade people. So it was not really a test for international communication, and yet they were pushed into Vietnam to be used for exit purposes for university graduates. But of course, if you know TOEIC, the old TOEIC had only listening and reading. There were no writing and speaking tests. Why? Because they're quicker, they take less time and less resources. It can easily produce a score. Even that, the Vietnamese students found it too expensive. So what they did was to develop a test that sounded like that looked like the TOEIC, and with each university was developing their own test that they called the TOEIC test, which was not really TOEIC. They developed their own test that looked like TOEIC. So that was initially what they did. Of course, it wasn't good enough for its purposes, which is why after a few years, the Vietnamese government decided to design their own test for Vietnam, for Vietnamese purposes. So they developed this V-step. But even that, they're seeing a lot of problems now. So the localization of an English language test is a painful and pretty difficult process. Developing your own, you can decide politically to develop your test, which they did. What they tried was to, I think it was 8 universities initially, the top universities in Vietnam, were charged with the development of their own V-step tests. One particular university is in charge of everything, and they showed everybody a version of the TOEIC test. So all other people from these other 8 universities were trained to develop the test that looks similar to this, this test, that protocol that they designed initially. So that was how they did their development, with little validation, actually. When, as I said, one of my students just validated the listening part of it, and found that it left a lot to be desired. So you can develop a test and call it whatever for local purposes. But the thing is, the test itself, in the designing and validation of it, needs a lot of work. And you need the local expertise and time to develop those tests. And not to mention, you can't really develop a test for all purposes. Vietnam was meant to develop this V-step to replace IELTS for all purposes, for teacher certification, for example. Every English language teacher in schools, if you don't really pass a certain level in this V-step, you have to be retrained. So that's basically saying that this test can be used for teacher certification purposes, indicating teachers' ability in not just English, but also English language teaching, which is funny in itself. And of course, it also is meant to be used for an overall language proficiency for everybody in Vietnam for all purposes in using English, which is not possible. So that's another problem with the localization of tests. Indonesia, not too long ago, I was contacted by a group of Indonesian scholars to help them develop a local English language test for their purposes, partly also because of this. You can't really use an international test for Indonesian purposes and asking these Indonesian students to pay for the hefty fees. And yet they have exactly the same problem. The political power behind the decision don't really have the assessment literacy in terms of knowing what a test is and what a test is for, and the limitations of language testing. So they wanted basically to develop a local cheap version of the international test for every possible purpose, which is definitely not the right way to go. So basically what I'm saying is there is this global need for English. There is this global need for English language testing, and yet these don't necessarily fit local purposes, and these are normally these international tests designed for international purposes are not necessarily suitable for local needs, and not necessarily at the right kind of level that can be taken by local people, especially in terms of the fees they charge. So we do need local tests. However, localization is beginning to see a lot of problems. It's not an easy job.
Thank you very much. I think that that's quite an extensive way in looking into the local global needs, and also the development even or the localization of language tests. I think we can discuss very briefly the next part. So I think it's quite interesting because we have our speakers have quite diverse experience in terms of testing. Particularly, Patrick is also doing for like language schools, which is intended to students who wanted to study abroad, right? So let's try to cover this point, which is testing across education levels. So let's begin again with Ajahn Kornwipa.
like Professor Gu mentioned, testing is needed for all levels, not only in English classes, but in other classes as well. I look at testing across education levels with, what should I say, different emphasis of purposes. Do you know what I mean? At the very young students, like primary schools or kindergarten, maybe your purpose of testing shouldn't be that harsh, because we would like to kind of persuade them or encourage them to learn something, right? So the assessment would be not really assessment of learning, but should be assessment for. That means you assess in order to help the student to learn. And adding on that, for Thai students or other ASEAN students, we would like them to love learning English as well, because many of us hate English. So we would like to kind of build environment in the classroom to not really like assessment, So assessment in order to help or facilitate their learning. So to me, that's for the young kids, right? But anyway, we cannot really avoid the standardized tests. In Thailand, we used to have ONET for primary school, right? Grade 6, right? Right now, we don't have that, right? Only 2 years, maybe we can cancel ONET. But still, teachers a little bit insecure in some school because they say, oh, we used to have it for a long, long time. When we don't use it, a little bit insecure in terms of, assessing student proficiency. But they will get used to it eventually, I think. At the primary school, I think the testing should be, like I said, assessment for learning to help the learner to learn, and then maybe would be a little bit more serious when they are getting older, like in high school, maybe. Primary school should be also some kind of assessment for learning to facilitate their learning and of learning as well. For high school, when they are going to enter university, I think they should, learn to get used to standardized test. And what I mean is the proficiency test. It could be standardized local test or, standardized global test, globalized test. So, so that's, we should kind of a little bit introduce testing to our classroom bit by bit. At the beginning of the study, or I don't think that students would be, assessed seriously in terms of, I don't want them to get pressure, in studying. Don't want them to just like study and then sit in an exam, study and then sit in an exam like this. It's not a student-friendly environment to learn English, especially, right? So it should be fun. Maybe you use like performance-based assessment or some kind of project or some things that let them, show their ability in using English, like task-based learning, project-based learning, right? So that's to me for the lower level. And then we're getting older. The standardized test means not tutoring. I'm not a fan of tutoring things to get into school, like ONET tutoring things. I'm not really into that, but I understand them, they need some kind of tutoring lessons. Otherwise, they won't get, they cannot do the test because testing needs some strategies. So let's say tutoring strategy is not the content one, right? So they have to have another kind of ability to take the tests, not really to only learn English, but ability to take a test in that case in order to get into a university. So apart from classroom-based assessment, that teacher have to, continue doing that in order to give them grades, right? So I think it's different in terms of different levels of education. At the high school, at the university levels, it should be a combination of things, because to me, university level should be a kind of a rehearsal place for the students to work outside. I mean, to work in the real world, in an authentic situation. So assessment should not be only focusing on paper-based tests or other kinds of tests that testing only knowledge, right? But we need to give them some rooms or opportunities to perform their ability that they are supposed to do in their future. So that would reflect the target language use of English, right? So a combination of methods for undergraduate or graduate student would be appropriate. That's from my point of view. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. Let's move to Ajahn Napat.
All right. Right. I mean, I worked a lot with high school students, you know, in preparing them to get into college. But I started a little bit earlier than that. I think to emphasize the point that Ajahn Kornwipa made about, you know, in primary school and probably still in junior high school, it is not just testing to test, okay, but it's just the testing to help them develop, okay. And you know, I've been working with Cambridge English Assessment as their examiner for a few years now, and they have two main test formats. The first one, they have the Cambridge English for Young Learners. Okay, so they are testing learners from age 6 to 12 years old. Okay, and there is no fail for that test. Okay, so you always pass the test. Okay, so that sort of reflects the thinking behind the test as well, that we don't want to fail the younger students. But when they move into sort of middle school and high school, when they start doing like CAT, PET, FCE, and all that, they can actually fail the test. So the stake, it's getting higher as they get older. Okay. Now with the current situation of you know, the testing in high school in Thailand, I've seen a big change in the past, you know, 4 or 5 years. That, I mean, we were very test driven back in the day. We are more test driven now. Right. So I mean, you know, I think people focus on, you know, like trying to not actually learning in the classroom in the school, but they are learning in the way that will benefit them when they are doing the national test. Okay, so they are learning in the way that will help them to you know, to do the EIL test, to take the TOEFL test, and this and that. And with that thinking, it is actually feedback into the way the curriculum is designed. In many of the schools in Thailand that I know, now they dedicate probably a third of the English language hours into test prep. Okay, so for example, let's say if they have to study English for 3 hours a week, 2 hours would be, you know, like general English skills, and 1 hour would be test prep, either like TOEFL or EIL. So I guess that's the I wouldn't say the changing landscape, but I guess it's the way that it is moving in the way that, you know, like people would the standardized test would be really embedded into curriculum so much more. And in the past, I guess the standardized test only used as I like the word passport. Okay, so it only used as a way to prove, okay, that okay, you are able to use English at this level. Now with a lot of international programming in Thailand being more competitive, then the score are used to rank the student, okay, into getting into the program. So the stake, it's getting higher and higher as well at the high school level. Now, moving into college, well, it's like when you move from high school to college, then you, in the first 3 years in college, it sort of give you a break from standardized tests. Okay, I mean you have to do the test, and you are tested for your subjects and stuff like that. But I guess those kind of testing and assessment are more specific, okay, to the field that you are learning, okay. And I guess even with English, so we are not assessing general English. I guess we are assessing the English that they will use in their own subject matters, like English for medical student, English for engineering, and stuff like that. And then when they enter the 4th year, now they have to do the exit exam. so they get back, okay, so now they get back into the whole standardized test again. And with the exit exam, then we have a lot of options. You can take IELTS, you can take TOEIC, you can take TOEFL, and you can take the local test, okay, from your universities. Okay, so I would say we have a primary school where we test to learn. Then high school, it's the time of standardized test. Then we give them a break in the first 3 years in uni, and then we come back to the standardized test at the end of the learning journey again. Okay, so I guess that's sort of my thought on the whole testing across levels.
Thank you very much. Let's now listen to Professor Gu.
Thanks. I guess I don't really have a lot to add to what Kornwipa and Pat was talking about. It's mainly a matter of purposes at different levels. For kids and younger people, it's mainly the younger you go, the more the overall educational purpose and this testing purpose is to help young people to grow. It's for the development and growth of younger people. So when you have a lot of big tests and standardized tests and high stakes tests, it's not meant for growth, to help for helping young people to grow. The older you go, the more testing purposes can become a matter of not rather than people growth, it's people selection. So for various selection purposes in society, you need these high stakes standardized tests. So, in terms of educational levels, it's the same thing. Across the world, we see more and more countries cutting down on high stakes kind of tests in the lower levels, such as, for example, primary schools and secondary schools. And some, especially East Asia and Southeast Asia, some even have high stakes tests in kindergartens. So definitely these are becoming less and less of a trend. Governments are pushing against this, whereas we do have the need for selection for higher levels. So across educational levels, yet probably I do also agree with Pat in the sense that at the tertiary level and beyond, it's less of selection anymore. Probably should also be focusing on the higher level growth of these elite in the educational system for their development and growth in their various professions. So testing has a role to play there as well in terms of people growth as opposed to people selection.
Can I add a little bit? Can I add a little bit to that? Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things that we as a teacher would like to do is to how can we prepare them to get ready for the test? Not only like study and then wait and then take a test. You know, how can we encourage them to keep learning English? You know, can kind of improve themselves all the time. Especially example would be easy at the university level when we actually teach in university level, right? They have 3 years, like Napat said, they have a pause, a 3-year pause. But actually, how can we, you know, not let them pause? You know, keep learning English. Otherwise, test would not be a friend for them. It would be a very like fighting enemy for them. You know, so how can we keep them learning in 3 years? Keep learning, and then when they get when it's time for the test, it will be not very, you know, scary for them. That's very challenging, right?
Thank you very much, our dear speakers. I think language assessment in this session is kind of safe to be viewed as something complex and dynamic. It concerns understanding learners' needs, global and local demands, and of course, the stakeholders. And these factors lead to language assessment as dynamic because it adapts in the changing needs of society. And I think it's the best time to transition to our next topic. And in this topic, we're going to be joined by one of our students in the EIL program who is specializing in language assessment. And his name is T. Salaprax. Hello, T.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Joey.
So at this point, I'll go ahead and unpin myself.
Great. All right. Thank you so much to all the speakers. It's been interesting to look at the various country profiles and to see the interactivity between the local and the global standards as well. And I know Professor Gu, you had walked us through the China standards and given us more insight to also how things are in Vietnam and Indonesia. So I think just to round out the conversation regarding sort of country differences, would love to just maybe ask Ajahn Kornwipa a little bit more about Thailand, in the sense that I know you were speaking about the Khon standardized test. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about that, because perhaps we can learn a little bit more about the local purposes that they seem to be fit for and how they may be representative for what's going on in Thailand.
Okay. Khon University Academic English Test. Actually, at Khon University, there are 2 institutes that are responsible for, I'm sorry, for developing standardized tests. The first one is Language Institute. The Language Institute is developing a proficiency test for undergrad students. It's more like exit exam in many countries. But my Center for English Language Excellence, is responsible for developing academic English language test for graduate students. So we kind of really focus on academic, similar to TOEFL, IELTS, right? But the CAP is similar to TOEIC. So my test is more like TOEFL or IELTS based, right? And we have done this for many years, but we just have this center for 5 years. So we are responsible for that. Apart from proficiency tests, we also offer intensive English courses. When the student do not pass the test, they can take the English courses in order to pass the requirement of the university. For our test, when we frame our test spec is based on CFR. B1, at least B1, B2, and C1. We have framed our work based on B1 to C1. And we include only reading and writing. So reading would be more academic reading. We use text that the students are supposed to read during their course and in the future, you know, more like academic one. And for writing, we use argumentative writing. Similar to TOEFL and IELTS, we ask for their opinions. It is more like agree and disagree style of writing, you know, and we ask the students to write. And we have at least 2 readers. since I used to do research with ETS, so I used a TOEFL protocol in terms of scoring the test, and I adapted the TOEFL independent writing test into the academic English test at Khon University. So that's pretty much the standardized test that I'm working on. We also do research to validate the test. We are mapping the test with the CFR because it's unavoidable. We need to kind of standardize our test based on CFR as well, because the government would say, oh, if you have band 5, what does it mean compared to CFR, right? So that's what we are doing, and we are trying to have our own writing scale since we adapted the writing scale from TOEFL. So is it possible to localize the writing scale to score our students because they are not very good in terms of English, you know? So that pretty much about the academic English proficiency test at my university.
Great, thank you so much, Kornwipa. Yeah, it's interesting to see sort of how the local standards are being affected by also the global standards. And I'm just hoping to just collect some more insights as we round out the country profile. So we'd love to continue on asking Ajahn Napat, in terms of Thailand, could you speak a little bit more about how Thailand is adapting to technology in terms of assessment, and how you see the current changes so far?
Right. I guess I think the pre-COVID-19 situation pre-COVID, I think Thailand, we were not really making use of the technologies in terms of language testing, okay, that as extensively as it should have been. Okay, so when the pandemic came, then I guess all the language tester, language teachers, and examiner, we just suddenly realized that we all had to use technology, okay, to help with the language testing process. What I have seen over the past 2 years with the use of technology is I see a lot of technology being used to deliver the test. Okay, I think that's the stage that we are right now. So we sort of substitute the paper and the pen and paper test, okay, with all the technology that can sort of replicate, okay, the test situation that is happening in the pen and paper format. I guess that's the stage that we are now. Probably, since I guess the pandemic will continue for quite some times in the future, I think that a lot of people are starting to think about, well, now we probably should not use technology to just deliver the test. We should probably find a way to actually augment, okay, the way that the test is being administered and the way that the content of the test is being tested. Okay, but I guess for now we are at the stage where we can just substitute the pen and paper with technology. But I'm really hoping that we can probably see that we can move from just from the state that we are right now to the stage where we can use technology to augment the way the test is delivered.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's certainly fascinating because especially during this time, so many adaptations have to be made. And so it's interesting to see that as well. And so perhaps that's a good segue to transition from the country profiles into sort of the challenges that maybe we currently face with the pandemic. And I was wondering if I could ask Professor Gu to speak a little bit about sort of the challenges that teachers may face in language assessment, but maybe perhaps more also about New Zealand, where you currently reside.
Sure. The New Zealand situation, of course, in terms of English language assessment is different from the Thailand situation or the Vietnamese and Chinese or whatever I was talking about, simply because this is a native speaking country. So in terms of assessment here in New Zealand, if you read about New Zealand assessment, educational assessment, you would probably be amazed at how progressive it is in terms of what we can do. We have a system that is called standards-based assessment, especially in the equivalent of your senior high or schools. And lower probably even. Mainly in senior high schools, we have a system called the National Certificate of Educational Achievement, NCEA. So all high school graduates before university will go through this kind of certification system, NCEA. For NCEA, it's, what is a standards-based system? So for every, can you imagine if you're testing or assessing a school subject, what are the standards for testing and assessment at the secondary school level before you go to university? So what they did was to make the standards as concrete as possible for each subject area at secondary school level. So for example, for each subject, normally it's about 5 to 10, not necessarily very concrete, but normally around 8 achievement standards, what they call achievement standards for each level of each subject. For English language, for example, they can have a standard for reading. For a few standards for reading, one standard can be reading text for information purposes. So long as you demonstrate abilities for, they describe each standard in very concrete terms in terms of what it means, what you can do to be able to, what you can show, what evidence you can show to have achieved this particular standard that is called reading, ability to read text for information. So they have basically, and then they have also exemplars to show teachers and learners, whoever is concerned, that they put these information online, so everybody can access these, what it means to have achieved this standard. But the thing is, these standards are meant to be as concrete as possible so that teachers know what to teach, learners know what to learn, and assessors know what to assess exactly. Which is exactly the thing, the ideal thing we would need actually as assessment people. However, can you imagine something like that being used elsewhere, for example, in Thailand, describing every school subject, every level into, say, 8 or 9 or 10 of these standards? It's first of all, it's really hard for some subjects to be broken down into these standards. And two, even if it is done, like in New Zealand, the teaching becomes the teaching to the standards. Assessment becomes assessing the standards. And that replaces teaching. That replaces the curriculum. It's in effect a narrowing of the curriculum. People do not venture outside of these 8 standards, for example, for any school subject. Is that all that students should be learning in school? That's a major thing. Another major thing is it's meant to be mostly internally assessed, so that teachers would assess these standards. They would observe their students, for example, over a period of time. Normally for each standard, it's about 3 weeks to a month of curriculum coverage. So within that month, you introduce the standard, you teach the standard, the students learn the standard, and you assess the standard. And the teacher is supposed to be doing the internal assessment. If you observe the students doing certain tasks, representing this particular standard, say, 3 times, you are able to say, okay, you have achieved this particular standard. That's the internal assessment. Roughly about half of these will be assessed nationally at the end of each year. Most of these, half or more, will be assessed internally by classroom teachers. It's really good as a system, but the thing is, when it's used both for high stakes and low stakes purposes, it becomes a real problem. Each standard, rather than being used for teaching and learning purposes, it's used for assessment purposes. So some teachers will say, I won't tell you how to do this. If I tell you, I'm not assessing you anymore, which is exactly what you should be doing. You should be teaching the current, the standards, rather than assessing the standards as the only task. So when you have a short period of time to work on each standard, normally teachers would, for example, over the month, they would spend very little time, like a week, introducing a particular standard very quickly. And then another week would tell the students, okay, now, go to the internet or work on, whatever you can work on to learn this standard. And then try to complete the tasks the teacher given to assess the standards. And then the teacher may or may not give a bit of feedback to each individual student. And then the 3rd week and 4th week onwards, it's assessment. So teaching becomes assessment. And that is one of the major problems that I see with the New Zealand system. Of course, it's meant to be a system that's conducive to formative use of assessment to help students learn. It's turned out to be not that way in terms of implementation. So that's the system we have, the main system we have in New Zealand before university, which has already produced a lot of problems for university, simply because when these students come to university, they've been learning that way at schools, and everything is fixed. They have to achieve each standard, they have to do this and this and this and not any other things. And they're accustomed to being assessed that way. In university is totally different kind of assessment. So university lecturers are complaining for years now in terms of how students in secondary schools are not being prepared for real learning of knowledge and skills, beyond secondary schools. It's good for certification. It's good for the kind of bit by bit counting of how many standards you have achieved, but it's not good for an open-ended kind of learning at adult level. So that's the New Zealand system. In terms of challenges during the COVID era, especially in terms of language assessment in my school, we are actually probably the best country in the whole Western world who have controlled COVID nicely. In the sense that we had only about 2 months of lockdown last year. So most of the time we're in a semi-lockdown or no lockdown condition. For example, we have a 4-level system. Currently it's level 1, basically means life as usual. So in that sense, we didn't really experience a lot of the difficulties that other people around the world have experienced in terms of language testing. What we did experience initially was during that particular trimester when we were teaching online, and we were really worried, especially about the exit test, which was high stakes. So supposedly students should be, those students who pass the exit test should be able to get the certification to go to university. When they didn't pass the test, they wouldn't be able to. So that's why the exit test suite was considered to be pretty high stakes. We were thinking, we were teaching these students online, and these students, what do we do if this lockdown continues for this exit test suite? In the end, what turned out was by the time the students were supposed to be doing the exit test, lockdown was over. So the students were able to come on campus and do the test on campus. So in that sense, we didn't go through the same kind of difficulties and problems other people have been going through in the rest of the world. However, that said, we were worried during that whole time of lockdown when we were teaching, and without knowing that the lockdown will be over in 2 months. What we did was to change the weighting of the assessment system from giving major weighting to the exit test suite to giving much more weighting to online, ongoing kind of assessment. And also we included much more formative kind of assessment during the online period, which has been going on even after the lockdown. So basically, the two things I was mentioning: one, the introduction of more formative assessment is going on even after lockdown. Two, giving more weighting to the interim kind of assessments, even for summative purposes. The interim kind of assessment was given much more weighting even now after the lockdown. The kind of problems we have experienced are very similar to the kind of problems elsewhere. Physical testing venues, when it's impossible, what do we do? For example, we have a screening kind of assessment and a placement test that is used at the beginning of each trimester when before international students come, and after the first week after international students come on board, we would give them these tests. However, because of this, because of COVID, we have developed an online screening test so that students elsewhere abroad can take this test online before they come. We can tell them, okay, with this screening test, you can be admitted into our EAP program, and you can you're expected to be able to complete, with this score, you're expected to be able to complete our EAP program once in 3 months, and then you're able to probably be able to go to university after this. So that gives students some sort of a prediction before they come, before they're admitted. So that's an online variation to the screening test. We're currently doing the online version of the placement test as well, including the development of an automatic marking system for even writing, so that students will not just sit. What if, for example, students are here, but suddenly there's a level 2 of COVID situation, so you can't really come on campus anymore? Then these students will be able to take this online version of the placement test. So we are doing this online thing, but the thing is, online testing across the whole world for high-stakes purposes are not well developed, not just in terms of online delivery, but also in terms of online marking and so on. Student cheating is a major problem, not just with English language tests. Universities across New Zealand, in terms of that particular trimester, for example, even now, when some international students are stuck abroad and can't really come back to New Zealand, all the university courses have to be taught online and assessed online. And many instances have been reported of students cheating. So, it is a major problem nobody has a solution for. And of course, another issue is teachers are not well informed and not well prepared. This is a sudden thing. Teachers have been teaching for so many years and assessing so many years. They're in their comfort zones. Suddenly, you tell them to have more interim assessment, to have more formative assessment, to assess for low stakes, to insert more low stakes assessment types. The thing is, how teachers are not really trained to do these. So these are the problems we've been encountering, and I've been helping my colleagues here in my school going through these in constant workshops, informal kind of interactions with people and so on.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Koo. Yeah, that's very interesting to learn more about New Zealand, especially the introduction, more on emphasis on formative assessments and the weighting adjustments that had to be done during the interim as well. So I just want to continue on with the part about the challenges, and I was wondering if maybe Kornwipa could speak a little more too about the current pandemic situation in Thailand and some of the challenges that that teachers may face.
That's Kornwipa,
That's right. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I kind of have a lot of challenges. So I have a kind of diagram. So I would like to share that to you. And yeah, so this is what I kind of sit and then reflected on what teachers, my colleagues, or even like school teachers who I'm working with a project with the school teachers. They have asked me a lot of questions about assessment, and also my colleagues and I myself. So the first thing, like Professor Gu mentioned, cheating. So cheating is the most concern point of the teachers, right? So they have a lot of things like, oh, what if we do the online test, we use Google Classroom, we use Zoom, and then they're still cheating. So it's kind of, you have choices to go. Some suggested solution would be you can change from like multiple choice into open book test, so just let them work, just let them study and then type something. Also, the question should be changed into maybe short answer or some discussion test, right? And you should time. It should be faster in terms of time. Maybe you cannot give them 3 hours, right? So you can give them like 1 hour at a time, but you can do it more frequently in terms of giving them the test. And in the test, you can shuffle or randomize. That means you have to have a lot of data bank or item bank, right? In that case, that's another problem that we kind of facing. We're going to talk about that later. You can use plagiarism detection software, right? In Google Form, right? They also added this kind of software for you in terms that you ask them to write something. You can use that to help you. Use frequent low stake test, and like Professor Gu mentioned, ongoing assessment. You should not rely on only the final exam or midterm exam that much. So probably you can a little bit change it into performance-based assessment or some quizzes, so don't put too much proportion of scores into the final exam or midterm exam. So use other types of tests to assess your students. And you can do coordinated tests. That means if you teach a big class, or a kind of 500 students, you can make an appointment with them, sit in the same time, do it with your colleagues, right? So you can kind of using time and space to control it. I mean, space may not be that controllable, but time should be used to be as a control factor for you. And you can use software that can help you cheating. That kind of software can block the student's screen. I use Safe Exam Browser, which is free software at my university, and it's compatible with Moodle, but it's a little bit complicated. So the teacher needs to be trained in order to use that software and in order to prepare your student to use the software as well. If you use that software, student can sit anywhere from their home, but without one thing that you kind of reduce your concern is to student cannot visit other websites when using the Safe Exam Browser. At least you have some kind of released or reduce your anxiety about proctoring, right? And then you can do others together. Second problem would be performance assessment is more challenging, especially in teaching English, right? So how can you teach students in a class like 30 students and then let them perform individually? That's time consuming, right? Maybe 3 hours not enough. So you can do something like you can use actually both synchronous or asynchronous presentations. You can make use of video clips, right? You can make use of TikTok in terms of videotaping their performance, but you need to give them clear and step-by-step instructions to do that. And also some rubrics that you need to tell them to what areas of ability that you're grading them. And I think to make it more interactive, not only the test, feedback from peers and teachers would be interesting. They may want to learn, like, what do friends think about my clip? What do teachers think about my performance in either like speaking, role play, writing, or some products that they share with us. Internet connectivity, that's a pain, especially for schools in Thailand right now. Primary school, middle school, high school, they have problems with internet connectivity. So what we can do is maybe the internet support from your schools, faculties, universities, or you can use different modes, a combination of synchronous and asynchronous assessment, and as well as teaching. Or sometimes you can do offline testing. But if you do offline testing, you let them do some tasks or some handouts or things, but you can put it into portfolio at least to see progress of their learning, not only the fluency or accuracy, maybe just the performance, the ongoing improvement of their ability or their performance, right? The next one is question bank preparation in terms of a number of questions in your test. Maybe you don't have enough banks so that you can randomize or shuffle your test questions. How can you do that? You can do the collaborative work with your colleagues. You don't have to write the test by yourself. You can ask them to help you, right? And maybe we can merge the test or use the test together, consider it together based on test specification that we agree, right? And then use it. We can recycle test items, but you should recycle it wisely. For example, you may change a little. If you have a good test bag, you will know that item 1 would test what, right? So you a little bit change your question, but still the purpose is the same. Or change some options, use synonyms, this kind of stuff can help you increase question bank or prepare your question bank, right? And using technology is good because you can store your questions in the system and you can reuse it anytime you want. You can adapt and then reuse it. One of the most important problem is how can we communicate with our students or examinees, right? Communication is very important in terms of preparing students and preparing your colleagues to get ready for the online exam, right? So the first thing is you need to have a clear and step-by-step instructions. You probably need to discuss this with your colleagues first, or if you teach by yourself, I mean, you're the only one who's teaching the course, you're going to prepare clear and step-by-step instructions for them. Do you want to have a manual for them if it's very complicated, or you can have a manual for this course only? We're going to do quizzes, and in order to do quizzes, what do we need? Or that kind of stuff. Or in case that we have the presentation, what do we need? That kind of things. Orientation, are you going to give them some orientation of using things? You're going to maybe make an appointment with them in advance to let them know how to use Zoom or Google Classroom or other software or system that would help you with the online exam. For example, at my center with the KQL exam, we have orientation for each group of test takers. We tell them the structure of the test and how to get into the system. We let them try getting into the system to make sure that on the test day, they won't have problems like these technical problems, right? So we have manuals for them, reorientation for them, and we have more than one communication channels. We not only orientation, we have like Facebook group, we have Line group, we have Facebook message, for them. So many ways that we can contact them in order to keep them updated about our test, because our students or test takers tend to not read anything. So even I prepare manuals, even I have an orientation, they still, ignore that. So we need to, try hard to get to their, to get them. So more than one communication channels are needed. For online exam security, of course, I mentioned the instructions, manuals, orientation, or software if you have money to afford, like TOEFL use ProctorU, which is very expensive, but they can pay for that. They can afford that. Like KKU and CMU, Chiang Mai University, Ubon Ratchathani University use Safe Exam Browser in order to give them the online test, especially for like a big group of students or test takers. Yeah, that would be it from me. The problems and some suggested solutions.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Kornwipa. That was nice to see in terms, especially within a diagram way. Since we're really running close to the end of the program here, I would just like to ask the speakers maybe just a very short answer before we do Q&A. Sort of the directions of language assessment. So I know it's a very big question for just a few minutes, but maybe it's could be some closing remarks before we go into Q&A. So if maybe Ajahn Napat, I can ask you to begin with that.
Thank you. Okay. So the future directions really, I guess it started from, when in the past we were mainly doing, testing and assessment face-to-face per se. And now we are moving things online. So I guess the direction that we are going, probably we will see more of the hybrid type of tests. Okay, so we see what worked with face-to-face. We see what works better online. So I guess the direction that we are going is probably one day we could combine the two. Okay, so what works in the face-to-face setting, then we would go for face-to-face setting. What works in the online format, then we would, you know, just continue doing it in the online format. And probably we would have to see, because I think now a lot of administrators, you know, like IELTS and TOEFL and stuff like that, they are doing pretty much almost everything online. And if doing things online can actually reduce their cost, okay, we might probably see that. We will probably see that. You know, in the future, all the tests will be moved online, mainly for cost-effective reason, not for pedagogical or test-taking reason, really. And that's something that I don't want to happen. Okay, I don't want it to see happening, but I'm really afraid that it will be the case as well. I would like to close with probably a more technological point, really, because I think now we are using technology to help with the assessment at both at the standardized test level and at the classroom level. Okay, because now using technology to do the test and assessment is probably still a novel thing, okay, for a lot of people. I believe that in 2 or 3 years' time, it will be at the stage where we can call it a normalization process, okay, where things become sort of normal. And then that it's the point where we can probably start thinking about improving what is normal, okay, for us. Okay, so we need to feel normal first in order to start improving on something, right? So I guess that's something that we can probably see in the next few years of the language assessment with technology and without technology as well.
Right, absolutely, yes. Thank you so much, Ajahn Napat. If we can quickly transition to Professor Gu.
Thanks. I do totally agree that the online addition of online alternatives is a must, and it is a trend that will stay. In addition to that, I do see the development of language competence, how we consider, I mean, it's a theoretical perspective of what language competence is that will change the way we assess language, especially, for example, if you look at the second version of CEFR, it included intercultural communicative competence and so on. So in addition to the traditional kind of language assessment, the 4 skills, vocab, grammar, we're moving towards more of a other kind of competencies involved, not just in terms of language per se, but also not just even communicative competence, but also intercultural communicative competence. And also other things such as, for example, I was going to say creativity, but basically it's higher levels of human cognitive ability that we aim for in addition to language learning. That's one thing. Another thing is the theoretical development of validity theory in educational measurement. It's been going on, of course, all the time, but the last 10 years or so, we've gradually seen a move from traditional kind of evidence-based validity and validation to a more argument-based validity framework, which is basically saying that when you claim a test is good enough for its purposes, tell me why it's good in a coherent framework. All the inferences you make about your test is good for its purposes, then tell me exactly for each inference how it is good for its purpose. So that is a direction that I will see will happen. in language testing. It's already happening, but will, become bigger. Another direction that I see is more of a, what language use is in real life situations, the demands of the target language use domain, for example. So that related to that is a matter of testing for specific purposes. We are already seeing that for high stakes purposes, such as aviation and medical purposes. So we will see more of these, in terms of not just teaching language for specific purposes, but also assessing language for specific purposes, simply because these generic kind of IELTS type, TOEFL type of language for general English purposes only reach a certain level, and beyond that level of language competence, you can't really say the student can be able to perform well enough as an engineer and so on. So it has to go beyond the generic language competence model for testing. So that's mainly what I have in mind for probably the next few years. And of course, our language is integrated rather than, specific aspects of language added up.
Thank you so much, Professor Koo. And because we have just the last minute or so, we'd love to take one question, and maybe we can have Ajahn Kornwipa address this question perhaps. So the question here says that English books in high school in Thailand are generally be quite easy compared to the entrance exam content. So students can do very well in class, but then when it comes time to the actual entrance exam, they struggle a bit. So the questioner asks why this may be the case, and how can we handle this?
Well, I think that should be a kind of a lack of connection between the test. What do you mean by this test? You mean the ONET test?
So
or what kind of test?
I think it's national test. Any test.
National test. National test. Okay. So in Thailand, especially, I think there's a lack of a connection or a link between the government and the school. It's recorded, right? I'm going to be separate. Really, yes. Because even though they claim that ONET is an achievement test, right? But in practice, schools in Thailand, they have, even though they use the same curriculum, but they choose books differently. They choose different books. They have a list of books, and then they choose different books. And I'm not positive that every book aim to, the same learning outcomes, right? So if they use different books, and then how can they, meet the standard that the government set, that kind of stuff, So that's one thing. So that's why we need some kind of tutoring classes for them, because what they have learned in school, do not appear in the test. And that very high stake test, ONET scores are used to promote the principal, for example, or the director, or to promote the teachers, right? So you're gonna get promoted or not depends on your students' ONET scores, that kind of thing. So that's the very national level of problem. I cannot help really, but I know the problems. I need to fix the problems, but I have no authority. So, well, what we can do best is to prepare our students to kind of help them love English. If they do something from what they love, I kind of positively think that they will eventually can take the test, can pass the test.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Teek, for moderating this session. I would like to thank all our speakers for gracing this nuanced academic conversation. stemming from local and global context. And your expert thoughts truly helped everyone to understand the value of language testing and assessment, particularly in this disruptive era and its trajectories moving forward. And with that, before I let everyone go, I would like to inform you on what is gonna happen next in the EIL webinar series. So after this, we have several discussions, one of which is happening on August 10th, but we have, hold on,
we have something early, Joey.
Right, we have the one in
here.
August 3rd
Yes.
and August 4th. Hold on, let me check. Okay, so let me share my screen. So for those people who would like to join us, we have
On the August 3rd is about global English.
right. Okay, there you go. All right, so there you go. Thank you very much, Dam. So this is what's happening next. If you wish to participate in this session, feel free to scan the QR code. And this is happening on the 3rd of August. All right, so once again, thanks everyone to our speakers, and we apologize for the time constraint, but we truly appreciate you staying with us, and we hope that this will truly help you in understanding the global transformations of language assessment in both local and global contexts. Have a wonderful day.
A wonderful lunch then, okay, for Thai people. Okay, and I would like to express my appreciation and thanks to like all the speakers who come and share your experience. Well, I think we've learned a lot from you. Well, I've learned as well about the English language assessment in many aspects. So thank you very much. Thank you.